It's ad break time. Beyond Solitaire is proudly sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations, and as usual, they are cooking up some exciting things in the educational gaming space. Cartini, From Darkness to Light, designed by Sharia Iwandini and published by Ion Game Design, is coming to Kickstarter on June 6th and will feature a curriculum guide written as part of a partnership between Ion and CLGS. Rising Waters, the second game from CLGS, will be fulfilling soon, and you should keep your eyes peeled for updates on the launch of their next release, 500-Year-Old Vampire. I also want to put in a word for myself. If you like this podcast and want to help me do more projects related to history and gaming, please go to patreon.com/BeyondSolitaire to support my channel. For now, though, let's get on with the show. Hey, gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I am here on the podcast with a very special return guest, Kevin Bertram of Fort Circle Games. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing great. How's it going?
So I'm doing great, as you know, because it's a very big week for both of us, because this is the week that you made the announcement that you're publishing Night Witches.
I have to be honest, it's a story that I'm really excited about, and to be able to have it play in a game narrative, I think is just awesome. So yeah, I'm so excited that we're going to be publishing Night Witches. I've been following you and David's design work on it, and I was like, oh, that'd be a good game for us to publish, and we'll do it right. So I'm so happy we're going to be working together. So that's great.
Yes, you'd better do it right, or else. No, I'm kidding. But I actually had you on here today, partially to talk about that, because our business is now intertwined. But I've talked to you about your business before. I had you on the podcast in June of 2021 to talk about being a new historical games publisher and what your vision was and how you wanted things to go. And I guess the real question, how do you feel things have been going over the last 2 years with Fort Circle?
So I think they've been going great. With one caveat is, there was a slowdown with the pandemic. Production got slowed, so we're a little behind where I would like to be now. We're going to be publishing our third, fourth, and fifth game this year. But I would have liked to have probably had that done last year. But other than the immense amount of time we put into each game, it's going great because Shores of Tripoli kind of set a standard, and then I think Tori's design votes for women, pretty clearly exceeded that, and is getting the rave reviews that her game deserves. And I think we did some different things by putting lots of historical documents in, making sure that the mechanisms were really closely tied with what they're representing historically. I think that we have a copy editor, which I don't think a lot of board game, or just at least in our space, have, and so there's not the typos or problems with gameplay that seem to have plagued some games recently in our industry. So I'm really super pleased that I think that we're doing everything right, and I think that the marketplace is rewarding us by Votes for Women is almost sold out, and we're gonna have to do a reprint for the holidays this year, and there's a lot of demand for we can see the excitement building on Twitter about not only Night Witches, but Volker Runke's game on the Hunt for Blackbeard, Talia Rosen's game about the Supreme Court, Gilberto and I's follow-up to Shores of Tripoli, which is the Halls of Montezuma. So I think, I just can't be happier, to be honest, about how things have went.
Awesome. And so I think the other reason that we are a good designer team and publisher matchup is that, David and I have been super open about what we're doing with our design process, basically from day one. Actually, our very first conversation officially about Night Witches was recorded for the podcast.
Nice.
So it's been like a very public enterprise the entire time. And you also like to overshare about your business details in well, it's not really oversharing, but share in a Substack called Negotium Ludorum, which I helped you name.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
The business of games. But you give a lot of very specific information about how you're doing as a publisher. And I wanted to kind of start by talking about that, why you chose to do it and how that has felt.
Well, I like doing it because I think it helps in a couple of ways. When I started, I talked to a couple publishers, but I kind of decided pretty early on, I think I'm going to self-publish, and I just decided to self-publish. And there wasn't a lot of guidance out there. There is some. Steve Jackson Games has a report to their stakeholders that's kind of helpful. It gives you a little bit of behind the scenes. Jamie Stegmaier does a pretty good job of that. A gentleman named James Matthew, who has since passed, was pretty good about talking about all the kinds of things like shipping and warehousing and art, like all the things that go into producing a game. But I always felt like they were always leaving a little bit out, and that's no criticism of them. Like everybody has their own style and what they want to share, and I just wanted to go a little deeper into the numbers and kind of explain why we do certain things. So like we had airmailed some games, some Votes for Women game, so at least people in the United States would get them before the holidays who had been Kickstarter backers. We thought that was important, but that was expensive. So we went through like, why did we do that? What was the the cost and the benefit? Why do I attend a certain convention? Or and trying to partially it's a way to rationalize decisions I've made to myself that they make sense, but it's also to kind of explain like why we're doing certain things, and why I think we're doing things the right way, and if I realize like, oh, something we've done is not the right way, then I'll call myself out on that and say, well, we've decided to make a change here, and now here's why. In fact, that's something that's coming up. By the time this posts, there will be an article about shipping and warehousing and using Amazon up, and like we made a change in how we handle some things because we found a less expensive, higher quality way to do it. And so, I shouldn't keep that information to myself. I want my fellow publishers to know, and I want people who are looking at being designers to know. There's also, a sort of a marketing aspect to it of that, the more I share about how we do things, I think there's more of a sense that people who like our games will identify and have a little more emotional investment in seeing our success. And I think that's just natural, right? It's like, oh, I know more about this company. I appreciate what they're doing. I'm going to definitely make sure to check out their next game. And I think that's valuable. It's certainly not the reason I do it, but I do recognize that there's some small benefit for that. So.
Yeah, so one of the things I noticed in response to the Night Witches news last week is I received multiple comments saying that people were happy that Night Witches would receive the quote Fort Circle treatment, and I am very impressed actually that people feel that there is a Fort Circle treatment 2 games in. Like that's quite the impression. So what are things that you're putting into the Fort Circle treatment, and then you don't have to give exact numbers, but how much more expensive is it to do it that way than it is to not do the Fort Circle treatment? Like, has it been worth it?
Sure.
And to what extent?
Well, it's not worth it if you don't sell a lot of games, but if it gets popular, then it is worth a lot. So, so the things that we do is, we took a test with the Shores of Tripoli, and we included one historical document in it, plus an essay written not by just some random person, but like by a person. She did her PhD. She's now a professor at the Naval Academy. She wasn't when she wrote it, but who knew a lot about the First Barbary War. And that reaction to that was really strong. And so with Votes for Women, I initially told Tori and I tell the story a little differently, but I think my version is right. As I said, let's find some documents. Let's start with 3 or 4 and then go from there. And she said, here's 14 documents. And I'm like, let's include them all. Looks great. And so then we went forward. And I think that, there's some extra cost to it. But I think it immerses the player in the history. And if we're making history games, there's a reason we're doing that. We want people to enjoy history. And like when you do research about a game, you get fascinated about it. And then you want to share that fascination with other people. And they can access some of that, most of that, by playing the game. But I think there's that little extra edge where there's a historical essay that explains some of it. There's documents that like really place you in the setting. And so that's sort of the standard that we do. We also, we don't skimp on the production, right? Like our boxes are known that you can use them as armor during a zombie apocalypse. We definitely insist on the best wood pieces we can get. I wish our wood pieces could be heavier, but they're as heavy as we can currently produce, that they have that the wood makes sense. We hire, like I mentioned earlier, we hire a copy editor to make sure there's not typos, and it's not going to be perfect. Like there's a card in Votes for Women where there is spelled THIER, and no, I'm sorry, it's receive is spelled wrong, RECEIVEIE. Anyways, it's spelled wrong. Don't put me on the spot on a Sunday morning to spell. And so but we try to make sure that we want our games to be treated the same way like a Pandemic would or a Root would or any of these games that sell 100,000 copies or more. That we want to put that same level of effort into it, even though our games right now are selling 5, 10. I think Votes for Him by the end of the year will sold 10,000 with the second printing, right? And so it's a smaller, right? Like historical gaming is a niche, but there's no reason why we shouldn't do it at the highest quality that we can. So, yeah. Boy, that sounded like propaganda on our part, but I really believe in what we're doing, so that's why I'm so passionate about it.
I mean, it does make sense. So the other question then is, so you're choosing games very deliberately. I think that the first few games that a publisher puts out are important because they're kind of a defining set of choices. So, what are you looking at when you're thinking about picking up games? And then, you're picking up a lot of new designers, a lot of very, interesting, like very American history concepts. And also, how do you feel your choices are currently different from other publishers in the same space? So like a GMT, a DBG, you're in historical games, or you're doing it different.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the number one is that our games are not exclusively military war games, right? Like I would say, Votes for Women comes out of the wargaming tradition, but it's wargaming, not quite even an election, but a campaign to, ratify an amendment. Halls of Montezuma it's a half political, half military game. So the American player is really the Polk administration. They're dealing with Congress. They need to get, treaties with Britain signed, and if they want, the 10 regiments bill to pass, so they get a bunch more troops. So they've got to manage the political side while also still prosecuting a war. And then the Mexican player is really not only the the Mexican government, but also there's an anti-war movement in the United States that is beginning. And so they're basically everyone opposed to the Polk administration. And that political piece is, super valuable to informing the military piece. Jason Matthews has an outstanding talk that he gave to the Georgetown Wargaming Society, talking about, how political and military discussions were separated mostly by Rand, and that kind of set the standard. And that's unfortunate because they should be actually considered together. So that was a long discussion about Halls Montezuma. But we're looking at games that they don't have to be military at all. Our game on the history of the Supreme Court that Tolly Rosen has is definitely about, it's not a war at all, but it's a long campaign for affecting what the shape of the Supreme Court is. My wife is actually designing a game on the history of the guano trade, which is, it's an economic Euro game, for lack of a better term, but it's still rooted in the history. And so, we're not a war game publisher, I guess, is the nub of it. We're a historical game publisher, and that gives us a little wider audience to work with. I want to jump back and answer one other thing about what the Fort Circle, what we do is we do partner with a charity for each game that we publish. So the Shores of Tripoli is about the Marine Corps and the Navy, and so we partner with Toys for Tots, which is run by the Marine Corps Reserve. We're doing the same for the Halls of Montezuma. The Votes for Women, we partnered with the League of Women Voters. The Supreme Court game, we partner with the Supreme Court Historical Society. Obviously, we're having discussions about who to partner with for Night Witches. Same with Hunt for Blackbeard. We're not sure who we're going to partner with yet, but probably some kind of preservation in North Carolina. And so we also try to tie what's happening in the game back into the real world, sort of, and how people, how it's relevant to real people in the real world. So that was a little jumping around question answering. I hope you don't mind.
No, I actually really don't. So, yeah, you know, this podcast is a very free flowing
Excellent.
podcast. And actually, I wanted to ask you too. So I know that Fort Circle is going for kind of a crossover appeal. So there are people in the more traditional wargaming space who are playing Fort Circle games, and then there's an attempt to kind of punch out into the hobby at large. Would you say that you are seeing success with that, particularly with votes for women? And if not, what do you do next? What's the next move?
I think we are starting to see successes, particularly with votes for women. Um, so we had a fairly small print run, 3,600 games, and but that's because I was getting a little nervous. I'm like, will this resonate? I thought it would, but um, it'd been a pretty small Kickstarter because Shores Tripoli hadn't been published when we did the Kickstarter for Votes for Women, so there was no Fort Circle way that people could point to. Um, and I think that if you judge by like the reviews of more mainstream publications, NPR is talking about Votes for Women, Polygon, and some of the video game mostly publications are talking about Votes for Women. So that's nice to see. The sales partially as a failure on our part because we're not in distribution yet, although we have those agreements are under discussion. It sort of depends on stores. So like our local store it was the best-selling game in March, which was Women's History Month. And so there's obviously an ability for it to be a good seller. But, it's taking us a little time to build those relationships with retailers, and, distributors in our industry are hesitant to take on new publishers if they only have one or two games in their library. But now they're all knocking on our doors. So, we'll evaluate that as we go forward. And what's really surprised me is even though both of our first two games are really fundamentally American history, the demand from overseas has been really strong, both in the Asia Pacific region and from Europe. So, that makes me, rethink. We made a small error in Votes for Women in that we used the state postal codes for each state and didn't think to include in a chart that explains like SC is South Carolina and MT is Montana, because we thought it'd just be mostly Americans playing it. And so, in the second printing now, we already put up a sheet on Board Game Geek that has the state abbreviations. So we do fix our mistakes, but but it's really exciting that it seems to have that the approach that we're taking is resonating because I just recently turned down a design about D-Day that I think is actually a great design, and I think it'll do really well. It's a designer who has designed a few games, but kind of like in between a new designer and an established designer, and I think it's going to be great. But I couldn't make it fit within our line because it wasn't quite historical enough, and also there's 50 games on D-Day, 100 games, 200, I don't know how many games on D-Day. And so, I think we're trying to find new things that engage new audiences. So, yeah.
Nice. So speaking of engaging audiences, okay, so the way that I first came to know about you and about your work is that you have a reputation on the street as that guy who's very generous with review copies. I think
Oh,
you know
yeah.
this. You
Yeah.
give out review copies like hand over fist, and all of us in media land know it. And so I guess my question is, has it been worth it? And where did you come to that philosophy? Because I've dealt with publishers who are super stingy with review copies, people who are super free with review copies. Like, why did you end up falling where you did in the spectrum, and has it paid off?
So if you buy a GMT game, you mostly know what you're going to get, or a Compass game, or a game from Milton Bradley, right? Like they have an established brand. Fort Circle does not have an established, or did not at least have an established brand. And so I calculated it out of that I would give away probably 1,000 games, and like some were donations and schools and whatever, but like it makes sense because so if I let's say you're a reviewer, you have a very small channel, and I send you one game. Well, Shores of Tripoli cost about $12 to get here. Well, with art and stuff, let's call it 15, and then I send it to you, and let's say that's another $15. So that's $30. But if I sell a game and a half from our website, then I've basically paid for sending you that game. And so what am I out by doing that? Well, if I made my money back because you introduced our game to 1.5 more people, then it's just a net net. But then if those people buy another game or another game or another game, then now we have a customer, and it warms my heart when I see someone come on and order both Votes from and Shores of Tripoli at the same time. I'm like, yes, because like that's someone who's bought into the fact that we're making interesting history of games. So yeah, so I don't see why it makes sense not to send a copy to almost anyone. There's a couple that I've regretted. There was someone who, just gave Shores of Tripoli a 5 and Votes for Women a 6 on Board Game Geek. I had sent the reviewer one of each. They played Shores of Tripoli once, didn't review it, and traded it away according to their Board Game Geek. And then they give Votes for Women a 6, which I'm like, all right, you're not for us. And so I probably won't send, now I know that reviewer is not in sync with what we value in a game. So I'm not going to probably send that reviewer another game in the future, right? And it's not, and I don't mind if the review is negative or not, but it's that they just don't appreciate the direction of what we're trying to do. And so I'm like, So I'm going to be slightly more judicious, but I send review copies to Hungary and Romania, and I have no idea if that pays off. But I don't want to, I want to make sure that people in other parts of the world know we care about them as gamers. I mean, I know that sounds a little silly, but that it just seems to be, a good corporate sense. And as long as they're engaging in the game with the games in a way that is, in good faith, even if they don't like the game, I'll keep sending them games, because that's one thing I worry about is people say, I have to give a good review to keep getting review copies. And no, I mean, the Washington Post gets books from Simon and Schuster, and even if the Post or the New York Times or the New York Review of Books slams a particular book by them, they're going to keep getting review copies of the next books, because that's just the way a normal, healthy industry works. And so, as long as I think that reviewers are at least engaging with the games in a good faith manner, then they should just keep getting games, whether or not the reviews are positive or not. So
Interesting. Yeah, I think that I don't want to talk about our current meta at the day this is recorded, but as usual, the discussion of money and media creation and all of that has reemerged. And I guess this just makes me want to ask you. So I know as a publisher, you have paid for some services. You have bought a tutorial of Votes for Women from me.
yes,
But you've also paid, plenty of other people for, tutorials, for previews, for coverage. And I know you send copies as well. So I guess just what has been the correlation between money spent and what you get back? And then what are you finding worth it?
So I should clarify, we only paid for one video for the Shores of Tripoli, which was a playthrough video. We've paid for 3 playthrough videos of Votes for, or tutorial, well, 4, I guess, because you did 2 tutorials.
Yes.
And then we had another tutorial and playthrough. And that was, the goal of that is to reach multiple audiences. But we've never paid for anything other than that. Oh, and then when we ran the Shores of Tripoli tournament, I hired Zilla Blitz to help me do recaps of how the tournament is going, and he was obviously paid for his time for doing that. But that wasn't reviews, but it was, I guess, related to the event. And so we would never pay for a preview. We would never pay for a review, because that's not how professional reviewing works. Whereas if we're hiring someone to make a tutorial, that's very different. And we're in our games, we actually say go to a URL to come look at how to play the game. We think that, different, a big mantra of what we say is different people learn differently. And so that's why if you want to learn a historical game, or if you want to learn something about history, right, you can read a book, you can go to a lecture, you can play a game. There's lots of different ways to learn. And similarly, people learn board games differently. Some people can read a rule book and they get it. Some people like to have a tutorial. Some people like to have a short tutorial or a long tutorial. And so, we want to make sure that our games are accessible to as many people as possible, and because they have different learning styles, that they should be able to access it. there is no way that, like, there's no chance that the money that we've spent on paying for tutorials pays for itself in the sense that that's generated sales. But that's not what how we should evaluate it. Similarly, we pay a copy editor to make sure we don't have glaring, horrific typos. Well, the copy editor doesn't sell more games, but the copy editor, like a tutorial, sets a standard of of what you can expect from one of our games, so you can learn it. It's gonna the copy editor make sure there's high quality. The top development work make sure like the game works. There's not broken parts of it, and then the tutorial, along with a well-written rule book, means that people can understand how to play the game, and that's just a cost of good. And so it's not a marketing expense. I don't think of it as a marketing expense at all. I don't even quantify it as such when I account for it. That's a cost of good. Whereas sending out review copies, that's marketing, right? Does that distinction make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting. I term it differently, mainly because I can see review copies as marketing for you. I really dislike it when people tell media that they count as compensation, because I don't think that the
Oh,
Washington Post or the New York Times thinks that.
no, no, no.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So like, we come at it from different angles, right? But I think that you're right. Um, I guess, I just think it's very interesting to hear you say it, though, because in a world where we typically think, oh, well, it's just given that publishers who want their games to do really well are going to pay previewers to make all the previews. It seems like that is not something that you've had to do.
No, and I certainly understand. Like, there's a natural, uh, at, inclination to be skepticism or cynicism, but I don't think that's true. And I think that the reviewers that I respect and like the best don't have that reputation. But maybe that's because maybe there's a relationship between those two things. So like Dan Thoreau, I actually probably do not have a very similar attitude about games I like to Dan Thoreau. I think he enjoys more avant-garde things. I enjoy things that are a little more rooted. Like, I can definitely tell there's distinctions about what we appreciate in a game. But a Dan Thoreau review, I'm going to take to heart, because I understand that he is engaging with the game in a critical manner that is interesting and important. And so while I might not always agree with him, I know that is a top-notch, top-quality, definitely ethical review. And I think there's a number of reviewers like that, and I could list them. I don't know if, like, what's the point, right? But I think we can all think of several people like that. And so I don't have any expectation that those reviews are bought, and nor did I before I was a publisher, right? Obviously, there is a, radio went through its payola system in the United States, and certainly, I'll be honest. So Polygon wrote an excellent review of Votes for Women, and I saw just on our Amazon and website that we sold on the day that review came out about $5,000 worth of games more than we would sell on a normal day. And I also know I got calls from stores saying, "Hey, we need more games. This review came out. We just sold out a bunch." And so, like, there's certainly value to a review that gets a wide audience. But I don't even know. I don't think it pays off to like a Dice Tower review doesn't move the needle for the most part. A review from you, I mean, great, and like we see some increase in sales, but it's not game changing. Polygon has really been the only review that's really been game changing. I know if the guys from the Players Aid review something, like, I'm going to see 10, 15 sales that day, right? And that's good, but like, it's not worth it to try. I mean, I don't think that the economics make sense to be buying reviews like that. Now, maybe in these massive miniature games, Kingdom Death Monster kind of stuff, maybe there's enough money flowing and the costs of the games are so much that maybe it makes sense. But I just don't see it from the publisher's side. As a YouTube, like, I see a ton of content creators, and I get that, like, this seems like a fun thing to do, but like, it's actually, like, you've got to be good at it, and it's hard to make money at it. And so, I mean, I'm appreciative of the hard work that people do, but like, I don't know, I don't know. There's a lot of people who want to be board game reviewers because it seems really cool, and then I don't think they realize that it's a lot of work. And then when they realize that it's a lot of work, I think someone will get frustrated. I don't know. I don't know. It's something it's not a skill set I have. So
Yeah, and I mean, of course, I come at it from a different perspective, and obviously, I can't review your games anymore. Really, I
right.
can cover them, but I
Yep.
can't. I don't feel ethical reviewing them because at this point,
Right.
our
We have a
business
business
is
relationship.
combined.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and even more, for example, I'll absolutely talk about how I feel about a chip theory game. I'm an established chip theory fangirl, and they've paid me for tutorials as well. I disclose that at the start of a video
Yeah.
immediately. Um, but as you get deeper in the industry, it's the number of things that you can ethically review decreases.
Yeah. Well, and it's such a small industry. So this is a total non sequitur, but I trust me, it really comes around. So, I coached college debate, and for lots of reasons, declining college budgets, that community shrank from in the '90s to now, like probably it's 20% of what it was size wise, right? And so there's only so many schools, and people go undergrad here and then they go to graduate school here, and at some point, like, how can you be judging debate rounds? Like, there's all these ethical, and then you like might teach at a camp in the summer to get like, and so there's all these ethical entanglements because it's such a small community that makes it really difficult. And I, I think that the board game industry is a little bit wider, but when people straddle jobs, so like you are just a reviewer, but now you're a reviewer and a designer, and that changes your relationship with the industry. You're fine. I mean, you're fine with all the other, but now you have a professional economic relationship with Fort Circle. Yeah, of course you can't review our games now. That makes sense. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah. It's just an interesting process to go through, especially because everybody is so buddy buddy in the industry, and I think within the kind of historical game space, like we all know each other. Maybe we don't all like each other, but I generally like everyone. I've had a good experience
I
with
like everybody who likes me. So,
it. But what it sounds like you're saying though is that all this sort of perception of money flying around everywhere and it being really, really key and all of that is not exactly the truth. That, like, no, you don't need to go drop $4,000 on a video or something like that in order to make your game survive.
no. You're better spending that $4,000 sending a review copy to every reviewer who will take it. Um, and and I should caveat as I'm talking about, our branch in the industry where, you know, 10,000, 20,000 copies is really good sales, right? When you get to the 100,000, 200,000, right? Those are different numbers. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that because I don't have any real experience with that. But in the kind of, a good, like, I think Votes for Women, by the time it's all said and done, will probably sell 25,000 copies over kind of a 5 year, and then there will be like a small residual tail going out. That's great for us. That's a huge hit as far as I'm concerned. But it's, it's nothing to Asmodee. And it's nothing to, obviously, to Milton Bradley, Hasbro. It's nothing to Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro. Uh, yeah, so I'm talking about the I don't think we're at the lowest end of the tier. Like, we're not like
Hmm.
500 print run, but 5,000 print runs. That's sort of where we're at. Maybe we'll grow a little bit depending on as we grow and as we have known designers publishing things. But yeah.
So then the next question, I guess, is like, do you want to grow any
Oh
bigger?
yeah.
Like, I mean, did you? What's the ambition versus
So
what you think you can achieve? I'm sort of curious.
I was having this discussion with Jason Matthews, and I think that reasonably keeping the same high quality of work, the development work, and I think that I can publish 4 games a year, like one a quarter at that rate. Um, I probably need to have 1 or 2 more graphic designers that I like working with. Like, I love Mark Rodrigue, who does all the maps. Bridget Delicato has done a lot of stuff on Votes for Win in particular for us. Like, I love working with both of them. It would be nice to develop a handful more of like like people who like I can like I don't like we're just on the same page, and that's really helpful. That really makes the that process better. If we were trying to get to 8 games a year, then I would definitely probably need to bring on someone who handled more of the logistics. Because like I handle all the customer service, I make sure everything gets shipped where it needs to get shipped. Like I do all of that. So I'm not saying like I'm a hero. I'm a one person. Like obviously I get help from my wife, and we hire a copy. We hire lots of people who are arms like 1099 employees to do a lot of stuff. But I'm only one person, and I'm in my, I'm 51, I'm almost 52. I don't move at the same speed that I did when I was 22 or 32. And so I maybe we could do 8 games a year, maybe six. Maybe I could do six, and maybe like if, my wife came on full time to help me instead of doing her job. But, we'd want to make sure the company is really safe before we did something like that. Or, bring on a logistics person to run a warehouse for me and handle some of the customers. I don't know. So yeah. But I'm averse to doing that. In a previous life, I had a tech company, and I hired willy nilly because I needed people quickly, and I had 25 people. And now I don't want that. I don't want 25 employees. So, but if I had 1 or 2 people I had to bring on so we could make 6, 8 games a year, sure I'd do that.
Interesting. So, at what point would you consider Fort Circle to be stable, and how do you know that you're at that point? How do you set that goal?
Well, we're not. We're not stable right now, but it's not a quite a. It doesn't support a full time lifestyle, right? Like it's still not it's not generating that much money. Uh, I think it needs to. I think that probably 15,000 games a year, if that's what we're selling, that sort of meets the kind of threshold that I think is a and we have a number of titles. So if we have one title that we overprint and we have to sit on some stock, but that doesn't put the company in precarious situation cash flow wise, like, and that just happens with time and breadth, right, of titles. And we're only selling 2 games right now. That's still really small. So
Yeah, I'm actually hoping that we can check it again in like another 2 years and see how that's gone, because I'm very curious about it.
yep.
And then you talk about kind of expecting votes from women to have about a 5-year major lifespan. What is the lifespan of a board game? I feel like some of them just flash the pan and disappear from my consciousness utterly after like
Well,
a month, and then others last longer.
well, it depends, obviously. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to pick games that would have a constituency outside of the kind of core gamers that there are. So the Shores of Tripoli still sells as well today as it did when it came out, but that's because the Marine Corps uses it. It's one of the games that the Marine Corps Association sends out to units. It's used in the classroom at the Naval Academy and at several other schools. There's just a natural, like, people who are interested in the history of the Navy and the Marine Corps who aren't gamers, but it's an accessible enough game that they'll play it. So I expect that we'll sell between 500 and 1,000 copies of the Shores of Tripoli every year for the next 10 years. And Votes for Women, I don't think it'll be done with sales 5 years. But I was just trying to say, like, over a 5-year period, and then it'll be a tail that lays out.
Mhm.
And I think Votes for Women will probably be a little more than that. It'll probably be more like 1,000 to 1,500 games a year, because there's always people interested in voting history. And as political issues rise and fall, there's more interest in it. There's always people who are in women's studies or history. Like, there's a constituent of people interested in the topic outside of the gaming community, but yet, because the game is accessible, because it has excellent tutorials, because there's not a bunch of typos, that people are like, oh, I can pick this up and learn it. And so I think that it will continue to sell 1,000, 1,500 games after its initial big rush, which is this year and next year. So
Right.
yeah, does that answer
Yeah,
the question?
actually,
Yeah.
yeah, it does. And then I guess I want to ask, since we've talked a lot about marketing and the kinds of things you're doing, what is the number one investment that you have made in your game so far that you think is the best choice?
I don't know. Like, because it depends on, like, is a copywriter an investment? Is spending an extra 50 cents in production for historical documents an investment. And I don't know, like they're all pieces of that, but like, I have a pretty clear vision of what I want our games to look like, and I want them to look good and be interesting and draw people in, and especially draw, not hardcore gamers or not war gamers in. Like I want, the more casual Eurogamer. And so, it's a total investment of what goes into the box, how we're reaching out to people, our partnerships with charities that introduces the game to new people. Uh, like, and so I've never really like, I don't think you can, but I haven't even tried to say like, all right, by including 14 historical documents, we have increased sales by X. Like, that's not. I don't think that can be done, and that's not how I approach it. Instead, I'm like, all right, let's make this product the highest quality that we can make it, and trust that that will be rewarded in the marketplace. And early indications are that it is. So.
Nice. Is there anything that you have just stopped doing because you decided that it was dumb and didn't work?
No, not really. Like I said, there's a handful of reviewers who just like our games aren't for them, and that's okay. I won't send them games, and they probably won't ask, and that's okay. Um, no, now that sounds really
No,
that
no
sounds
regrets, regrets, or regrets.
no. I'm pretty pleased with what we're doing. Like literally, the only thing I wish that the pandemic hadn't held up the production of Votes for Women, so we could be a little bit further along in the process. But other than that, I'm super happy. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And then I have one more just kind of marketing question, which I think that you have a vision to do something a little bit different with marketing than what you typically see in the board game space. So you talk a lot about reaching people who aren't typical board gamers. You are making sure that you're sending copies to different sorts of outlets like, Polygon, like IGN, the Washingtonian. What do you think that that is going to become something that people more typically do? Is it a
Well,
you thing?
I hope nobody else does it and only we do it because we sort of have a monopoly on this. No, like I think I think if our mission is to widen the scope of historical gaming, then if we're only talking to the same people, then we're not fulfilling that mission to widen the scope of historical gaming. And so that's why, right? Like we reached out to NPR, we reach out to Washingtonian. I have really high hopes that closer to Christmas or the holidays that the New York Times is going to have a story about votes for women, and and those discussions have begun now. And like, I just think that these are the kind of things that if we want our industry to be taken seriously, then we should be talking to more than just ourselves. When I turned 50, I set a goal for myself by the time I turned 75 that there's a Pulitzer Prize for historical board gaming. That is a unlikely to be achieved goal, but like why not? Like these games are works of art at some level, and deserve to be treated as such, and if we're not going to treat them with respect, then why should anybody else? So let's go out and let's broaden that interest.
So this kind of leads me to a final real question before we do like wrap up softies, which is, so you're a businessman, and that is, you want your business to be successful. You also have a lot of very dream like ideas, right? About what can, that's not bad though. It's like about what can happen with like a Pulitzer Prize, or let's take historical games seriously, they're works of art. How much of your decision making is business motivated, and then how much of it is just something that you just want to bring into the world creatively?
I mean, the amount of cash flow certainly is a check on any dreams that get too wild. Uh, so most I think the decisions are rooted in a business perspective, because I think a broader market, more people buying our games is good for us. I think that's self-evident, and it's more of what are the methods to do that. And there's certain things we could do, like we could start making fantasy games that, whatever, that would probably sell 10 times as better. But I'm not going to do that because that's not a space that I know and I'm all that interested in. I mean, I respect it, but it's not what I want to be doing. If I wanted to just make money, I would not be in the board game space. So, I mean, obviously, there's some aspect of, I'm in a space that I love, but if it's a hobby, then it's going to be done at less better quality and not as serious. It's just not going to be as good as I would like it to be. And so I have to approach it like a business. I have to make business decisions. I tend to err on the side of quality because I think that, I can, if, let's say, so in Halls of Montezuma, right, we're going to have recruiting posters and newspaper stories and all kinds of cool things. We have essays from both a Mexican American and an American on viewpoints on the war. Like really try to give it all that good flavor and value. How much more is that going to cost? I don't know, $5,000 maybe when it's all said and done. But how much more valuable is that game? How much more people will engage in it because that's in there. So, it's hard to measure exactly how much, like we're not going to put 500 historical documents in there because then, that's silly, right? But so like trying to find that right sweet spot of what is the product that we feel good about, that we think will engage people, is a process, right? What was in Votes for Women is different than what's in the Shores of Tripoli. And it's going to change over time. We're going to find what that right sweet spot is. You'd actually asked if I had any regrets. Yes, I wish I would have put more historical documents in the Shores of Tripoli, but I didn't have the full conviction that people would be interested in that. So we put one just to test it out. And that was a mistake that I wish we had. That's a regret.
Second printing. There's always the second printing.
Oh yes, and there will have to be. And so yeah, and we'll also probably we'll add a couple nice things just to make it worth buying. So.
Heck yeah. All right. So what are you playing right now for fun? What is your Dune Imperium count? And then what else are you playing for fun?
Oh my God. The Dune Imperium count is super high. So my wife and I started tracking in an app tracker with Rise of Ix. And that's actually not that much. That came out this year and we weren't playing nearly as much as when we were during the pandemic. So that's why I'm looking down. So we have played
Only this year.
This is just since Ix has come out. We've only played that 196 games, but we had played the base game before Ix came out, and especially during the pandemic when we didn't have so much to do during the day. We played that over 600 times, and so that's a fun game to play. I really want my wife to play this game Union Stockyards that just came out. Because I think there are a couple of things that the designer is doing that's neat in the game. But you got to play it to see if that's true. But it's about slaughtering cows and pigs and sheep. And so I don't know that she's really jazzed to play it. But she'll give in, I hope. We're going to be playing Terraforming Mars in 2 weeks with another couple that we like playing games with. We'll probably play more games in the summer. During the school year, a lot is tied up with our daughter, and so we don't play quite as much. But the British Way just came, Littoral Commander just came, but I'll probably play those with Jason Matthews, not with my wife. I don't know, what else has come?
Guano.
Oh, well. Yeah, and of course we're working on Guano, but those discussions are hush-hush for now. So, but I'm very excited. I honestly believe that will be our best-selling game. More than even, the magic of you and David Thompson with the Night Witches. I think that's going to sell very well too. But I think Guano, I just think that one's going to be a home run.
I'm just going to reiterate my desire for squishy poop tokens.
Yes, well, I think that my wife does not want squishy poop tokens, but those can be a separate purchase. So
add on.
Yes. So and I sort of share her concerns about squishy poop tokens, but I think they're cool also, so we'll see. So
fantastic. And if people want to find you, I mean, obviously I'm going to link everything in the show notes, but where can you be found online?
I'm Fort Circle at Twitter. I'm just Kevin Bertram on Facebook, but I'm not on there as much. And then the Fort Circle website, so fortcircle.com.
Fantastic. All right, Kevin, thank you so much for letting me take up some of your time on a Sunday morning to talk about business. It's always good to hear from you.
Always a pleasure.
All right, so hopefully we'll check in again about this in a couple more years, like track the progress. But for now, everybody, please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.